completely change the dynamics of the evening. It's your turn. It's questions. Now, unfortunately, we can't get a microphone to you, but you're country people. You're used to talking to people at the other end of a paddock, so we should be able to hear you. So, does anybody, well, let's start the questions. I'm sure there are many questions if you'll have. Who would like to start off? Oh, come on, don't be shy. Yes, right there, thank you.
Jim Murphy, City of Shepparton. Mark, I enjoyed your talk. Excellent. Everybody in the forum panel. The elephant in the room is the owners of the distribution of the energy, of the electricity in this particular case. Going fully renewable, we will trade an African elephant for an Indian elephant. Some commercial operation will own them. So the escalating price of electricity and gas, can you say that it would be held under control, or will it just keep going the way it's going with a different operator?
With renewable energy, there is obviously some upfront costs, some capital costs. But the great strength of wind and solar is that there is no fuel cost. With bioenergy, there is a fuel cost, and one has to assess that. But with wind and solar and hydro, you have no fuel cost. Fuels, the price of fuels is going to escalate in the future. It's going to continue to escalate. Except maybe coal. Coal might collapse entirely. We don't know. So in the long run, and with our economic analysis, we find that in the long run, renewable energy systems will be economically competitive. Already, the subsidies that renewable energy are receiving around the world are generally much, much smaller than the subsidies to fossil fuel, and they are far smaller than the subsidies to nuclear energy overseas. So I feel confident that from an economic point of view, things will be better. In terms of power and control, which you alluded to in the beginning of your question, the beauty of renewables is that they work on a whole range of different scales. You can have quite large centralised systems, not as large as a 1,000 megawatt coal-fired power station, but quite large. You can have community scale systems like the Hepburn wind farm, which is 2 megawatts, and there's a lot of community projects now being developed around Australia from wind and sun, and I'm not sure about bioenergy. And then there's the residential scale, where really if we put solar on our roofs, we exercise far more control. And as batteries become cheaper over the next 5 to 10 years, more and more people will be able to in fact disconnect from the grid. It's not cost effective now for most of us to do that. So we'll have a much more diverse system in the future. I believe we'll still have an electricity network, but the network providers are going to have to redefine and reconceptualise their business models, because the existing models are collapsing quite clearly, and that's why they are lobbying our federal and state governments to try and remove all subsidies to renewable energy, but not just remove all subsidies, but to actually stop the growth of the technologies in their tracks. They're not going to be able to stop solar PV, it's getting too cheap, but they've certainly delayed the growth of wind farms, and certainly large-scale solar power stations are also, at this stage, very hard to develop. So we're in for some very interesting times.
Thank you.
Yes, down here, thank you. And you make it a long question because I've got to go and get the coat, it's cold.
Not a long question, it's more of a statement. I was speaking tonight have mentioned methane gas from sewage farms. I know that sure there's a generating system operating. They started off the trial and now it's professional. And also landfill gases from landfill. No one's mentioned it.
Luckily it wasn't a question for me.
Oh well, I'm the taken bioenergy person tonight, so perhaps I should address that one. Yeah, I think there's a couple of systems around here that are, and you're quite right, you're absolutely right, you can collect methane in these environments and use them, and there are a couple of systems around here. I don't know what the potential for further development of those systems is around here. But I don't know if there's been a biomass resource audit done in this area. That would, if you were going to lay out a, well, let's go 100% renewable for Shepparton, there's a number of steps that you would take first in terms of just auditing various characteristics of potential energy systems for the area, and one would be to actually look to see if there's further potential for that kind of energy generation. Does that answer your question, or address your statement?
Well, there's a very large one down Harry Warren. I visited that years ago.
Yeah, but Narrow Warren's a long way from Shepparton, though, so we've got
That's the same.
Rod, I'll have a go at answering that question as well. The study that I made reference to, the Tatura Energy Opportunity Study, will be looking at a range of opportunities of capturing and harnessing energy, which includes the gas that is released from the organic material, the waste streams that are identified within our locality, but also a partner of our study is Golden Valley Water, and a partner of theirs is Diamond Energy, that owns and manages the gas plant that you're referring to down at the lagoons in Tatura. So that is incorporated into our study. We recognise that it's cutting-edge technology that's happening on our doorstep, and it's something that's really exciting. You don't have to go far to see that technology, but that will be incorporated into our study to look at what opportunities there are for expanding and complementing and feeding back into the grid.
Well, yes, thank you there.
Dave Brown, I've got a question for David on orchards. So how do you address the harvesting of the biomass, the efficiency of it? Because I've asked questions before, we burn for it, and the argument was, well, couldn't we take it somewhere that sort of by the time you spend all that money and fuel and everything to get it there and break it all down, it'd probably be better off just burning it.
well, I think that's a really interesting question. I'm glad you asked it. One of my supervisors is the Professor of Forest Operations at the University of Sunshine Coast. He was based at Melbourne Uni, but he got an offer for a professorship, so he's off to Queensland. He runs a biomass supply chain, a research team, which addresses exactly this kind of issue. And the sort of points that we want to look at if we're going to do that kind of study is what volume you have, what volume you have per hectare, the nature of the resource, what it's currently costing to deal with it as it stands at the moment, so like an offset cost, if you like, against potential harvesting. I've had some discussions with macadamia growers in northern New South Wales. They think, I don't claim to have any huge expertise in growing macadamias, but they thin them out quite heavily when they're relatively young, and it generates a surprising amount of biomass. And there was some initial work done looking at taking that to local energy plants. There's a biomass energy plant in Lismore, which is supplying heat for a number of purposes, or one main purpose. So I can't tell you right now if it would be profitable or worthwhile doing, but that's the kind of study that would be done to look at it. And that biomass supply chain research is a well-established area now. That it's quite clear how to do it, what to do with the wood in terms of chipping it. At the other end, that's again very well understood. There's technologies available, various sorts of chipper and so on. I mean, you will have seen some of those just around Shepparton, just dealing with arborist waste and local tree waste and so on. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's good. We're heading in the right direction.
Again,
We're always after research projects that we can get grants for too, so I just kind of float that.
happy to talk to you about that, David. Can I just add that that matter is also a component of the study that's happening at Tatura, recognising that there's a fuel source there. We want to then look at the viability of that to be added. I think one of the recurring themes from the previous speakers was that there's not one technology that's going to solve and strengthen our network, and it's recognising there are multiple sources of fuel, and the waste residue, both from the food and from the crops, including the horticultural trees, is certainly part of the mix that we're interested in, and have consultants currently looking at it.
Yes, yes, thank you.
I just have a question. Shepparton has a large amount of commercial properties what are owned by landlords and have tenants. Is there any way of harvesting the roofs of those commercial properties to have solar panels where there's an income for other landlords to then reduce the tenant space or costs, or is that absorbed by the companies now?
Now, did you all hear that question? No. Okay, well, basically it's a question about the commercial, well, generally commercial buildings in Shepparton, buildings that are currently landlord-tenant relationships buildings, and what are the options and opportunities for renewable energy on those buildings.
Well, I could make an initial comment from Sydney, which is that the major conference centre at Darling Harbour is being renovated. It has a huge roof space, and an arrangement has been made where community groups are basically involved in putting solar PV on those roofs. So it's a joint community project, and commercial players all reaching an agreement on how this works. So in principle, it's possible, but I don't think there are yet a lot of examples around Australia of it being done. It's very common in Germany and other parts of Europe, where someone has a big roof and others, members of the community, get together and make a contract with that commercial owner to have solar PV on the roof, and everyone wins. It's a win-win situation.
So it doesn't require the tenant necessarily to be instigating it, it can be the community saying, you've got a roof, we want it.
It can be the tenant, it can be the community, which may include tenants of the building.
Yes.
Can I answer that question?
Yeah, right.
Oh, there is some legislation that is going to be likely to be passed before the end of the calendar year. It has bipartisan support in the state government, that is looking at introducing environmental upgrade agreements, which will be a legal mechanism that will make it, the scenario that you're describing, available to those who are renting properties. It will be looking at mechanisms tying environmental upgrades to buildings back through the rate mechanism that will make it effective for renters to be party to this adoption of energy efficiency. So I'd say with confidence it's coming and it's expected to pass. So Jeanette may have a comment to add to that.
Yes, please.
Yes, it has been introduced into the Victorian Parliament. It's already happening in Melbourne, where they have developers and commercial businesses that can make their businesses more green, and they can get it from a bank, but it goes back through the councils, and the council can put it on their rates. So that will now be able to be in all municipalities where developers or people can do solar panels or do whatever they can to make their buildings more energy efficient. And if they can go through the banks, borrow that money, but then they work with the councils, and the councils will actually bring that back on their rates. So it is about trying to make people more efficient, but spreading it out over a number of years so they don't have to